to you.
So I'm curious, how many of you here have walked some kind of a labyrinth at least once? Okay, so I'm preaching to the choir tonight. I can shorten this a little bit. So Labyrinth, of course, then, as you know, is a form of prayer. It's a prayer, of course, that's given physicality. A single winding path going into a center usually and then coming out again. Mazes are closely related to labyrinths, but they also have dead ends in them as well, so they're a little more complicated. The internal view from a labyrinth, especially if you imagine walls on either side of the path that you walk, can seem very chaotic. Instead of moving toward the center, which is the place of wholeness, of healing, the place where we meet God, we can find ourselves moving away from that, outward, and then changing direction, and then changing direction again. That kind of chaos, I think of it as kind of like reading the headlines these days. Things look pretty chaotic, but the external view, if you get up high and look down on the labyrinth, what you see is this incredibly beautiful pattern, this symmetry, with all of that moving back and forth and in and out. The most famous labyrinth, of course, as again probably you guys know, is at the Cathedral at Chartres in France. It is the first labyrinth I walked, and I stumbled on it. It was completely by accident. I went to France in 96, and I was there because I was interested in Mary Magdalene, the apostle to the apostles. And there's a great deal of lore and churches named after her and relics and pilgrimage spots dedicated to Mary Magdalene, especially in the south of France. So I went there with a friend of mine with that intent to delve into that. But what happened when we landed in Paris, which is to the north, and we're there one day, and our friend who we stayed with in Paris said, well, we need to do at least one thing. And so we took the train, it's a little over an hour, out to Chartres, and went into the cathedral there. How many have been to Chartres? And it's stunningly beautiful. It's one of the few cathedrals that was not looted and vandalized during the Reformation. It has intact all of the statuary, all of the stained glass, just an absolutely stunning cathedral. And when you walk in the door, there is laid out on the floor this labyrinth in stone. It's sort of the canonical labyrinth of Western Christianity. And normally it's covered with chairs, but about one day a week, usually on Friday, they move the chairs and you can simply walk in and walk the labyrinth. And that's what we did. I had no idea what I was doing or why. It just seemed like the thing to do at the time. What I came to realize is the walking of that labyrinth was the beginning of a part of my spiritual journey that led not just through the lore of Mary Magdalene, but eventually back for me into a new kind of connection to Christianity and eventually to the ministry. And then I came home. I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area in 96, and I had heard that there was a lovely icon of Mary Magdalene based on a picture of a woman, an Afghani woman, actually, just a stunning picture. And the original was hanging in Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. And so again, I was searching for Mary Magdalene, and I walked up to Grace Cathedral, and there is a replica of the Chartres Labyrinth laid out right in front, outside, and then you go in and there is another one, same size, in the carpet. So you can walk it inside or you can walk it outside. And what I came to find out is Grace Cathedral was sort of the hot spot for labyrinth work starting in the middle 90s. A woman Lauren Artress, and you're going to hear a lot more about her next week from Michael, actually started this movement that has ended in so many of us having walked the labyrinth at least once. The labyrinth journey is a mythological journey. It has some similarities, not an exact match to a hero's journey that Joseph Campbell used to talk about. The one that we can access most easily comes from the Harry Potter books, actually. The Goblet of Fire, who remembers that? Ever read that? No Harry Potter fans in here. Okay. So the woman who wrote those Harry Potter books knew a great deal about mythology, especially Western Greek mythology, and a lot of that is actually woven through the books, and that's certainly true in this one section where the main character is undergoing a test where he has to walk through a maze. And it's a maze, not a labyrinth, but it actually has many of the obstacles made explicit that we find in the mythologies that have been built up around the labyrinth. So first he walks into it and nothing is really going on. It's really quiet to the point of maybe he's starting to worry why it's so quiet. Many people talk about a release from the world as they enter a labyrinth, a leaving behind of everything, and it can be kind of a quiet space as you enter that. And then he has a soul eater, a dementor, come, and he overcomes that by actually accessing power from his own father. And so there's this idea of help from others as we walk that spiritual journey. And then everything turns upside down. So his feet are still on the grass, but he's hanging upside down over what appears to be an abyss. I think a lot of us in our spiritual journeys can relate to having things like that happen to us at one time or another, the complete upheaval of our lives or our understandings. He gets out of that when he has the courage to begin to move his feet, even though he's upside down, and everything then switches back again and he's standing upright. So there's this element of courage in walking that. And an element of self-reliance as he begins to rely on his own magic. He's a wizard, for those who don't know Harry Potter. And then he hears another student who's also trying to get to the center he is trying to get to, because this is something of a competition. And that student is clearly being tortured. He's screaming in agony. And so instead of moving toward the center, he goes and sorts out what's going on so that this other student isn't being tortured. And so there's this compassion that becomes part of the journey. And then he encounters a sphinx. Sphinxes are associated with riddles, and that's certainly true in this story. He can't get past the sphinx unless he can answer the riddle, and that takes his intelligence. So we also bring the mind in as well as the heart. And then he reaches the center, but he reaches it with a companion, and they together take the chalice, the goblet that is there in the center, and in picking that up, they are completely transported outside, not just outside of this maze, but quite a distance away into another kind of reality. So that's the kind of mythology. It's very similar to what we have in something like a hero's journey. I find it relevant today because the labyrinth also can represent the world. And today I look at the world around me and I have deep concerns. I think there's a lot more conflict, a lot more anxiety. And if we think of that labyrinth as our whole world, or even the world that we have in our own context, we can begin to walk it as a prayer of transformation. I'm going to close with a passage from Lauren Artress. I promised Michael I wouldn't do any Lauren because he was going to do it, but just this one short passage. The idea may seem silly, but here it is. Walk into the nave of the elegant Episcopal Cathedral on Nob Hill, then step onto a lush wool carpet, its ancient labyrinth design woven in purple and gray across 37 feet diameter area. As you follow a winding path for 20 minutes or so, you might cry tears of grief or joy, solve the riddle of a messed up family or work life, feel better about an illness, or gain spiritual insight. Walking the labyrinth clears the mind, it gives insight, it urges action. It calms people in the throes of life's transitions.